From the island of Montreal, beneath the ever-changing skies of Canada, good morning, good evening, or good night, wherever you may be joining us. This is Whispering the Weather, where every cloud has a story, every storm leaves a legacy, and every forecast is the beginning of a conversation. Now here are Lise Macaulay, Aramelinda Beaucaire, and the Whisperer himself, Mark Sirois. Welcome once again, Era and Lise. Hope you had a great week. Lise, saw you at Quinn Farm.
Yes.
For a brief moment, as I was getting off the tractor, you were getting on the tractor, and we did exchange a hello.
Yes.
But it was a great time this weekend and beautiful weather, and hopefully you enjoyed some of those strawberries and blueberries.
Delicious. And nature is phenomenal. Just
It's
going
so
to pick
beautiful
them.
out there.
And the blueberry bushes were spectacular. It's well worth a visit.
Great. So we're going to jump right into the topic of the week, which is quite topical. It's the weather and the health. And we've had some heat, we've had some smoke, we've had a bunch of different stuff going on. So I think it's a good opportunity to talk about our health and how the weather affects it. And joining us today, a very special doctor, a longtime friend, Susie Tector, who is here to join us to talk about the weather and the impact on health. Susie, maybe you can introduce yourself in terms of how long you've been in the medical field, where you're working now, and some of the experiences that you've had over the last few years.
Sure. Thank you, Mark. So yes, so as you said, I'm a doctor. I work in Ottawa. Now I've been there for the past 25 years. And so I am trained as a family doctor and emergency doctor. And for the past 25 years, I've been working at the Montfort Hospital in Ottawa. So it's a community hospital that serves the Franco-Ontarian population specifically, but so services in French and in English in Ottawa. So I work in the emergency department there. And yeah, so that's been 25 years, which is hard to think of now. But and then I have also worked with Doctors Without Borders, so doing international and humanitarian medicine. So I've worked for eight different kind of missions or placements with them over the years, but I stopped doing any overseas work about 10 years ago with them. And then in Ottawa, I also work as a coroner for the past 15 years. So in Ontario, it's a medical-based coroner system. So there's an investigating coroner who goes out to the scene. So I do that. And then I also, for the past few years, have been working at a refugee clinic. So one day a week, I work in a clinic that sees newly arrived refugees, the government-assisted refugees from all over the world. So that's how I'm kind of continuing the humanitarian work and refugee work, but in Canada, as opposed to going overseas. So yeah, so that's, I guess, my experience and my my history.
I don't know where you find time to even be here today with that roster of stuff that you've got going on.
Incredible.
And with the Doctors Without Borders, so tell us a little bit about the locations that you had worked in, and because obviously weather was a component there, because probably much different than Canada. If you can let us know where you were at.
Yeah, so much different. The weather definitely much different than Canada, but also the weather having often a huge effect on a lot of the places I've worked. So my first placement ever was in Darfur, so this is 15 years ago or so, at the time with the civil war going on there, and then that's come back around again. Now there's a lot of fighting again in Darfur, which is sad to see, but a lot of the conflict there was because of, with the warming temperatures and the Sahara Desert kind of moving south and taking away arable lands or lands where people could take their animals to graze. everybody was scooshed into a size of land that couldn't support everyone. And so that really increases the amount of conflicts going on in that part of the world for sure. And that's been forever, but anyway, weather makes a huge difference. But so, yeah, so I've worked in, Sudan and Darfur, in Chad. So basically just across the border in Chad, which had a lot of the same issues. I've worked in the Democratic Republic of Congo on 3 different times. So one was in a part called North Kivu, where there's been essentially an ongoing war for the past, 50 years, essentially. And it's a part of the world that is absolutely beautiful and actually, weather climate wise, in a different kind of existence, different world, it would be a paradise. It's the most beautiful part of the world I think I've ever been to, but there's been just ongoing war and all the populations there have been displaced and there's a lot of violence. So, and then in the Congo, I've also worked in a cholera epidemic and a measles epidemic. And then I've worked in Pakistan, and I worked I'm forgetting where I worked, in Syria at the start of the war in Syria, and then in Nigeria as well. Yeah.
So
Wow.
that's a heck of a list of experiences there, and I can assume that when you come back to Canada after all of that, the weather here probably seems like paradise to you in regards to just how we have access to air conditioning and that is you can control the climate much more than you can in those places. Um, what was the most difficult weather related type of environment you were in all those different options?
So I think probably like the most striking to me, or the one I remember, was I went to, again, the first time I ever went was in Darfur, and I left I left in at the end of February. So it was like minus 30 here, with wind chill and everything. So I left here, and then within 2 days I was in essentially the sub-Saharan Africa, in the desert, and it was 40 something degrees.
Yikes.
And I did not cook well for the first I'd say the first week or so, I was very unhappy with the heat. And then you get used to it. So, but no, that was very much, yeah, that was a huge, obviously, strain on my system, and I'm not good in the heat anyway. So, but I find you do get used to it. So luckily, you get used to it. But then when I worked in Pakistan, we were up in kind of the mountainous area, along the Indus River in this small village, and that was the winter, and it was very cold, like it was freezing, and there was no indoor heating at all. And like the toilet was kind of, you'd go outside and it's like a little outhouse kind of thing, and the little shower kind of room was an outhouse shower thing that was just, you poured water on yourself. And that was very cold. So I guess it's been both. I think I'd rather be cold than hot, though. Still, I'm a true Canadian. I'd rather be a bit too cold than a bit too hot. So
With
yeah.
you. With you.
So so with we'll keep that in mind as we go through these different weather subjects, because I'll probably come back to it, especially during the lightning round of questions that I'll bring up. But if we start off kind of talking about heat waves, so I obviously you've been in a lot of different heat situations, and depending on the population you're in, they will react differently to heat as than others. So I'm sure that the folks that were out in those areas where the temperatures are in the upper 30s all the time, they would look at a heat wave here and they'd go, "There's nothing." Mind you, we can go to um, a snowstorm in Florida and say, "What are you guys complaining about? It's barely accumulating." So I guess it depends on the kind of person you are. But generally, heat waves, when you hear the weather forecast that a heat wave is coming, where you're working now in Ottawa, I'm sure you cringe in understanding that you're probably going to see some heat related patients coming in. So First of all, let's start off the view of if heat waves from your perspective as a doctor. What concerns you the most about the folks and a heat wave that comes through?
No, yeah, definitely a heat wave. When we hear, when we hear it coming on with the forecast, it's something that we prepare for. We always see more patients coming in. And typically the people most at risk are either elderly or people who are unhoused. So it's the people who are at more risk anyway, and especially, older people. I think most nursing homes, retirement homes are getting better with having air conditioning and that kind of thing, but they don't all still, as far as I understand, or, especially older people living in small apartments on the upper floors who don't have air conditioning. So we know we're going to get, some people coming in with heat related illnesses. Typically, it's people who are at risk. So it'd be more unusual to have healthy people who aren't doing some sort of activity. But people who are unhoused, and a lot of the shelters, people aren't allowed to stay in the shelters during the day, so they have to be outside. And if they don't have access maybe to enough water or anything else to drink, or they're not drinking for whatever reason, then those are the two populations definitely that we see the most of. And then the other group that's in there, when we talk about, when I was saying before, we don't see that many sort of otherwise healthy young people. The people we do see typically would be people who are working outside, especially physical jobs, or people outside who don't really, realize maybe they're not used to being outside, and they're outside because for whatever reason for their job, and then aren't hydrating enough, and who get overheated and don't recognize it, and keep going because they're doing their job and they feel like they can't stop. So those are, I'd say, that the population that we tend to see, but it's definitely something we keep an eye on when we hear about heat waves coming, for sure.
I would
And
guess
what hap
probably.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. No, I was just gonna say, both Lise and I, Mark, obviously have been doing weather for a long time, and one of the things that people forget, people will be at bars, and they'll be drinking a lot and drinking outside in the heat, and they think, "Well, it's okay. Like, that's great. I'm having a nice ice cold Long Island iced tea or a beer." Tell me the medical reason why alcohol is not good during extreme heat.
Well, yes. So there are two reasons really. One is that alcohol actually is a diuretic, so it makes you pee more than you would if it's equivalent thing of just water, or anything else. So alcohol actually, like, you lose some fluid with alcohol. And then second part, which is equally important, is your decision-making capacity, perhaps after maybe a few Long Island iced teas or something, is not as good. And so then you might stay out longer. You might not realize, you might think, oh, I'm a little bit, I've got a bit of a headache, but it's probably the alcohol. And you don't realize, maybe you're out at the beach, or you're out at a barbecue, and you don't realize that you're actually getting, heat related illness, like, heat, temperature stuff, as opposed to, oh, there's just the couple of beers that I've had. So it actually, it's not that you can't drink at all, but definitely you need to be having your water or other non-alcoholic drinks with it. So it can be a huge problem if you're just hydrating, quote unquote. I'm doing little air quotes, without drinking other things, and that definitely can be a huge problem. Yeah.
What would you say would be the best thing to drink during a heat wave? Because you hear reports that too much water isn't good, but you don't want to have those high sugar drinks as well, those Powerades. So what would be the best thing if you start to feel the heat in a heat wave to drink?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, because there's so many products out there now too. It seems like when you go into the dépanneur, it's half of it is like these energy drinks, or these like sports drinks. Um, but really, it's anything that you'll drink is the big thing. Water, good old fashioned straight up water, is always good. It is theoretically possible to drink too much water, but but I wouldn't worry about that. When you're hot and you're doing you have to drink so much water that it's an issue. That I don't worry about drinking too much if you're either doing sports or in the summer or when you're feeling warm outside, you essentially cannot drink too much water in those conditions. All of the like Powerade, Gatorade kind of things are good because they do have electrolytes in them, but they also have a ton of sugar. So, alternating water in one of those is would be okay, but the amount of sugar they have can actually make like that's not good for you either because it's actually but some of them better than others. I don't know all the different companies, but it's really whatever you'll drink. Some people don't like water, so if you don't like water, then drink the sports drink or whatever else. And the key is to drink enough of it. So you really should be drinking like a cup of water if you're really out in, maybe you're playing a game, soccer, topical, soccer on a nice Sunday afternoon, then you need to be drinking water. You should be drinking about every sort of 15, 20 minutes, like at least some water if possible. And then if not, then putting some of the things with some taste in them into your water, if that makes you drink it, but it's whatever makes you drink it, and drink it like you essentially can't drink too much.
So what happens to the body when it overheats? What's physically happening inside that creates all the negative stuff?
Well, it's because our body is amazing and has so many different self-regulating mechanisms. So essentially, when your body feels the heat, then your brain gets activated. And then the brain sends the signals, and the two biggest ones are essentially on your skin. So the skin sort of opens up all the sweat glands, and then the sweat comes out, the liquid, and then that evaporates. So it's evaporation. So this all that sweat that we get so irritated with comes out, and that's what is the main mechanism actually of cooling is the evaporation from the sweat on your skin. And then the second one is that it what's called vasodilation. So it means all of the vessels on the surface of your skin dilate so they get bigger instead of being smaller. And then that also makes you lose heat because of that vasodilation. So in the cold, it's the opposite. They constrict. So all the blood vessels on your skin, on the surface, like clamp down so you don't lose heat. And when you're too hot, they open up to help you get rid of the heat. So it's a great system. And then all that while your body is sending you messages that you just have to listen to, and your body's telling you, get out of the heat, you're too hot. So you'll get nauseous often, really fatigued, a headache, thirsty. You'll be wanting to drink, and you'll be sweating a lot. And that's your body saying to you, like, get out of the heat, drink some fluid. This is too much. And if you don't listen to it, then it progresses. So there's always some symptoms before things get worse and onto something like a heat stroke. And by the time, if you're not, again, sort of listening to it, because either you can't maybe because you've been drinking a little too much, or for whatever reason you're at work and you don't feel like you can stop and your boss is going to get mad at you, or you're running a marathon and you want to keep running even though you're starting to feel unwell, like all these different reasons, then it will progress from there. So you really have to listen to those early signals because that's your body giving you all those warning signs. And then if you don't do enough of that, or you do it too late, then it can eventually lead to actually all of the sweat glands that opened up, and we're doing such a good job of getting rid of that sweat and it evaporating your body, you sort of run out of the sweat. You're getting too dehydrated. So that's no longer working. So you can actually stop sweating is one of the things. And then, by that time, the headache can become that you're actually losing consciousness. You go into a coma, you can have seizures. Like from then it can progress and become really dangerous. But so the key is really to listen to those early symptoms and get out of the sun, get hydrated. If you're with someone and they're starting to have those symptoms, make sure they're drinking, because they might, even though they're thirsty, they might say, "Oh, I'm nauseous, I can't really drink." No, they have to drink. Cool, like if you have a towel or something, dip it in water and put it on them because that cools you off more quickly. Like or if it's yourself, make sure you do that for yourself. But that's the
And
key.
the key differences between heat exhaustion and heat stroke? Is there really they're not the same thing, correct?
They're not the same thing, but there's like they're on the same line. So basically, heat exhaustion will lead to heat stroke. So it's not like two separate things happening. It's if you get through the heat exhaustion and you're not getting treated, then heat stroke becomes really like the sort of hallmark of it is that your level of consciousness is changed. So you're either confused or you're unresponsive, or you again, if it's severe, you can have a seizure from that. So and then that has a much higher mortality with heat stroke. Like at that point, it means that it's actually affecting your brain, and people can die from it, or have permanent brain injury and that kind of thing, or kidney injury. So that's the difference. It's that the amount, the degree. Yeah.
Any questions, Lees or Era, on this
The
topic?
only thing I had, if someone has had a heat stroke or experienced the fainting, are you more susceptible to get it in the future or to be more sensitive to the sun in the future? Or is it just a one-time thing? And if you're careful about it, you're never going to experience
it. It's a good question. I don't know. I haven't seen any sort of evidence or anything, but I wouldn't think you're more prone to it again. Like your same systems are still working for you. But I mean, you would think, yeah, you just have to be, it's really the things to mitigate. I would think you would be much more aware of so that it doesn't happen again. And the other thing too to mention is there's certain medications that can make people more prone to heat exhaustion or heat stroke. Basically, they're medications that can decrease your body's ability to self-regulate. And so it's just to be aware often when you're on those medications that you just have to be more careful maybe than the person next to you who's not on the medications. So, and it tends to be like heart or blood pressure medications or psychiatric medications often have that where your body can't get rid of the heat as easily. So again, something to be aware of. You should definitely, it doesn't mean you should stop taking your medications during a heat wave. It just means you have to be more careful. Yeah.
Great.
Nope, it's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. So switching over from heat now into thunderstorms. Yesterday was another example of, we were supposed to get much heavier storms than we did, but there were still some that were rather impressive out in the Drummondville area. But in the last month, we've had them all over the place. Ottawa flooded. We had a happy here in Montreal as well. In your years of being an emergency doctor, Susie, have you ever treated someone that was hit by lightning?
I was trying to think. I had one person that I can remember. I don't remember anybody else as far as I know, but no, it's not common, but it happens. I've had at least one as a coroner as well, so it's someone obviously who didn't make it, but most people who are who have a lightning strike or that kind of thing the survival I think is 80 to 90%. So it doesn't mean you're going to die, but it can have huge, obviously.
And it's rather rare. So if you've only seen really one or two in your entire career. So
yeah. And that, I mean, it may be two where I work or what I have seen, but no, so it is definitely something that's unusual to see, but impressive.
sure.
If someone's hit by lightning, and it might sound like an odd question, but are they safe to touch if they need to be handled or you try to save them? I'm assuming that the lightning is no longer a concern at that point, right?
Correct. Yeah. So, but it's a good question because I think there have been maybe or an old wives' tale or something that you can't touch them because they're still you could get electrocuted. So no, absolutely, you cannot get electrocuted from touching a person who's been struck by lightning. But I'd say the number one thing is make sure you're safe too. So, it's like when you take a, St. John's ambulance course or a CPR course, it's the first thing always, no matter what, is make sure if you're helping the person, are safe. So if it's, during the lightning storm, someone's been struck by lightning, last thing you want is to get struck by lightning yourself. So just obviously make sure you're safe first. And then definitely you can touch them if they're not breathing, they don't have a pulse. You can start CPR, because what typically when people die from it, it's almost always because essentially our heart runs on a kind of electricity too that's within the cells. So that's why we defibrillate people, like in the TV shows Clear and all that kind of stuff. Um, so so it's basically like they just got a big defibrillation, and instead of bringing the heart was beating normally, and if you put electricity on that, then the heart can stop. Whereas the way we use it medically is the heart's not beating properly. So when you put electricity, it can actually restart it. So, but the lightning, so really what they need is to try and get the heart restarted. So actually starting CPR, if you're somewhere that they have an automated external defibrillator and AED, more and more places these days,
Mhm.
especially public places, have them there. They're super easy to use. The machine tells you exactly what to do. You can put that on a person and you can give them shocks if they needed. So definitely it's a high yield thing to do, is to start CPR on somebody, only if, their heart's not beating already, to do that. And then otherwise it's just often they end up with injuries. So like just to make sure again that if they have a spine injury, just to be careful for that. And then to call 911 right away. Yeah.
Have you ever, in severe weather, whether it be due to winds or flooding, had patients come in that were victims of those particular events, either a tree falling on them or being caught in the flooding? Do you see, especially like Canada Day, Ottawa had flooded. I'm assuming you were working that day.
Was working that day. Yes. Yeah. I was working that day. Um, but so flooding less so, but definitely wind. So a lot of trees, branches coming down, and, parts of roofs and that kind of thing. With flooding, I think we're lucky most of the time, or what I've experienced certainly, is that it's not usually such a fast thing that people get so caught up in it. But that flooding can have more issues sort of long term, if your house is flooded and maybe, you've lost all your medications maybe, and then you can't get, or you don't have electricity anymore and all those other health effects. But definitely when in wind, I think wind is an underestimated um thing that people are still outside and doing things and don't realize the risks of it, especially with trees. Yeah.
Right. Now, my mother uses a CPAP machine, and thankfully, I've never been tested in this situation, but I've always wondered if she's sleeping with a CPAP machine and the power goes out due to a storm or another reason that the power goes out, is she at risk of suffocating in that CPAP machine when the power goes out?
So no, so the machines themselves have, like, so essentially what it would be, because CPAP machines usually either they're like a nose part or the part that goes over your mouth, or sometimes both. So the machine would just stop working, but which I'm sure would wake her up,
Oh,
because all of a sudden it's not blowing the air in anymore. But you can't, like, it's not enough of a seal that it would sort of suffocate you in your sleep or anything like that. And then it's not, ideally you have your CPAP machine, but to sleep a night without it, is not, the end of the world for something like a CPAP machine. It's not like the same as people who need oxygen, say, like, are oxygen dependent, um, with the CPAP machine. And then you need to, anyway, once the electricity comes back on, then she could use it again, but it's not, yeah, it's not a risk for the electricity to just go off for that.
Okay.
And then people who have, say, are oxygen dependent, so people with things like COPD, which is like chronic bronchitis, emphysema, who are on oxygen at home, they should always have, like, they'll have their machine that processes the oxygen that you plug in, but then they should always have just oxygen tanks
yes.
available in their home in case there's a power issue or they have to, go out or mobilize. So usually that is enough to get them through, say there's a power outage from flooding or wind or whatever.
I have been told that I've taken several St. John ambulances courses because I've been at work one of the safety officers as they call it. But one of the things that they told us is that like during a thunderstorm, aside from unplugging all your computers and anything else, unless you have a surge bar, but I've been told that you shouldn't be like taking a shower or like because once again, the lightning is always looking for the quickest path to the ground. So, my dad actually did have a patient who was in the shower and lightning hit the house and he was getting water and he got shocked. And it wasn't the shocking that hurt him. It was the falling in the bathtub and hitting his head on the bathtub. But that is, I think, something that people should be aware of, because once again, during a lightning storm, it's just looking for a way to touch down, and to be aware. One of the things I've learned is like just to sort of be aware of where you are in a thunderstorm. They say when thunder roars, go indoors, but also try and stay away from things like metal poles and showers and even electrical, anything as simple as a fridge and a stove, because it is connected to a wire, which is connected to a grounding wire. Have you ever had anybody come in with accidents like that?
I'm trying to think. I did have someone once that this is, again, dates me a little bit because it was landlines. People were calling on a landline and got a bit of a
Shock.
shock through the landline of their phone. They were fine. Like it was nothing serious, but they felt the shock come when they were on the phone, the landline phone during a storm. But otherwise, I would think, I would think again, that the amount of electricity shouldn't be a large amount. I would think that sort of getting in, most of it would go through the rest of the structure, unless maybe you're out showering outside or something, which
No.
you shouldn't be doing during a thunderstorm. Um, but yeah, it is amazing. Like because the amount of power in that lightning strike is just incredible. Like the amount of I don't know offhand, you guys might, but the sort of number of volts equivalent is
Well, you
staggering. So
you
yeah,
see what the power of nature can do to the human body, and that's where you, as a doctor, you see the repercussions of all of those different atmospheric events, let's say.
yeah. And with things like a lightning strike, like you don't really think initially of some of the injuries from it. So they're not necessarily things that in emergency you have to deal with, like as an acute kind of when they first come in. But I think I don't know if it's certainly I think most people at least who get hit by lightning have rupture of their eardrum. So the
Oh
pressure so ruptures at least often one of the eardrums, and you can end up with cataracts afterwards too
gosh.
because the lenses. So yeah, in your eyes, so you end up with these kind of weird kind of chronic issues from things like lightning strikes that you wouldn't even think of. Yeah, yeah.
And so just before we switch to the next topic, I'm assuming that you see more folks coming in from a winter storm than in a summer storm. Is that a correct
I don't know.
assumption?
Because actually, it's funny because when there's a winter storm, during the storm, we're a lot less busy because people are hibernating. So if there is a storm coming, I actually like working those days because it's not going to be very busy. And also, a lot of the people who normally would come to the emergency for things that aren't necessarily an emergency aren't coming in. People aren't driving as much. People aren't out and about now. So actually during the storm itself and right afterwards, it's actually a nice time usually to work in the emergency department. And any accidents that happen, like car accidents, tend to be lower speed, so less injuries. So now I don't know if there's any kind of evidence behind this, but just in my experience, it's on the nice summer sunny days that you get the worst car accidents because people are driving a lot faster and then maybe they've had something to drink, but it's the speed. So if it's bad weather, if it's an ice storm, if it's snowy, people are already hopefully driving a bit slower. So there are more accidents for sure. And like the police would be busier and the tow truck drivers would be busier. But again, and just from my experience, the emergency departments aren't busier for major traumas. There might be like a scratch or a soreness, but in terms of major injuries, it's less during the storm. And then after the storm, the winter storm, you get, or maybe we're going to talk about this after because I know we're still in the thunderstorms, but after the winter storm, then you get other kinds of injuries like snow
Right.
shoveling and all that kind of stuff. But
Slip
yeah,
on the ice and broken wrists and broken
yes,
So
everything.
so if I'm gonna hit my hand with a hammer, it's best to do it during a winter storm, so I'll be
yes,
able to be seen. Okay.
yes.
You could tackle all those
Exactly.
projects during the storm.
Yeah.
Get out the
Exactly.
circular saw. Those are the ones I have vowed never to use any electrical saws in my life because I have a very skewed view of them because when we see people often it's from those
Oh,
kind of things.
Ouch.
So the next subject is another topical one because as I look outside the window right now, I do see a little bit of haze, but we're dealing with fire smoke coming in from the northwest, so a part of Ontario, part of northern Canada, and it's also starting to impact the U.S., which they're starting to complain about. So the air quality and fire smoke is becoming quite a subject. Do you see a lot of folks come in when the air quality is getting a bit hairy in your area?
Definitely, yeah. So over the past few years, those times like in the summer when there's more of the smoke in the air, and that mostly it's asthma, people with asthma, people with COPD slash bronchitis, emphysema, some heart disease too. But a lot of the airway issues come up, and sometimes in people who don't have a history of asthma or anything else, but we definitely see a rise in those kind of things for sure.
I think with the fire smoke, because it's a lot of it is burnt organic material. When you look at there's a site I look at, it's like World Air Pollution, and they have the SP level, which is suspended particulate, which is basically ash and stuff. And so we're low today, but Toronto is much higher. And aside from inhaling it, is there any chance that your skin would absorb it or your eyes?
It shouldn't. It's really the issue is really the inhaling, especially if there's smaller particles that can get further in your airway. And because if the particles are big enough, your body doing its work, is sort of you're coughing them out, or in your nose, like the hair in your nose is kind of filtering things out. But anything that's smaller can get down a lot more. So if you have kind of healthy lungs and you don't have diseases like asthma or that kind of thing, then your lungs can kind of deal with it over time. But and shouldn't cause any like permanent issues. But if you have things like asthma where your airways are just so inflamed as a baseline, then it doesn't take much. It's like smoking cigarettes or something. It's gets in there and it just irritates your poor little lungs. But on the skin, as far as I know, otherwise there shouldn't be any major issues unless maybe you have a sensitivity or an allergy. But for most people, it wouldn't be an issue. Yeah.
So on the allergy side, and I think we just went through. Well, we're still always going through it, but we went through a pretty tough spring with pollen. How do you see your emergency department getting busier with people that are suffering from allergic reactions to things in the air?
We don't see them so much in the emergency department. So most people for that kind of allergy wouldn't, some people do for some reason and they wait, 12 hours to be seen. But because most environmental allergies, you're not going to get the anaphylaxis or the airway closing and those kind of things that would bring them to the emergency department normally. But definitely it can be part of what's going on. Like people come in sometimes because they think maybe they have a cold or they have a runny nose, but it turns out it's allergies. So some of the things that we advise people for allergy during the allergy season in terms of just behavioral stuff can be helpful too during smoke, the high smoke time, which is like close your windows, wear a mask if outside, if it's a big issue for you. But things like, again, if you're lucky enough to have an air conditioner, you don't have to sleep with your windows open because it's so hot. Then close the windows, limit the time outside. I was talking yesterday to my nephew in Montreal, and he has asthma, and he was going to go out for a run, and he was just like, maybe you should maybe wait a couple of days to go out for that run, in terms of the smoke yesterday. But yeah, so with allergies, and then luckily we have some good medications like the non-drowsy antihistamine medications that you can just get over the counter that are super helpful for allergies most of the time. So that's a really helpful
How do
for
you tell the
allergies.
difference between a bad allergic reaction with sneezing and wheezing and a cold? How, as a doctor, how are you able to tell the difference?
Usually by history, with allergies, typically it'll be more a bit of a more chronic thing. And whereas with now, again, hopefully not too many people are coming to the emergency department with colds or allergies, but it does happen sometimes. And in the clinics, definitely you'd see it. So yeah. So whereas like often with allergies, if you're having the runny nose, you'll also have the itchy eyes and other things going on. Obviously, if it's, oh, I had the same thing last spring and it got better over time, helps you a lot. But often, allergy can spring up anytime. So you can have not had a tree allergy your whole life and then all of a sudden get one. So, or if it's a particularly bad year like this year was. So, really it's more so yeah, and the clear, usually if it's allergies, like it's that the runny nose and sometimes the postnasal drip, and it tends to be just clear and not yellow and thick and gross and all those other things.
At this time of year, because I have asthma, I don't have a lot of, like, during the year, not much, but I'm one of those people where I use my, pumps more often in the spring and the fall because those are the greater periods, and it's a good thing to remember that if you do have that, to carry them with you. Because 'cause I'm an idiot sometimes. I'll go out for a walk, like yesterday, and going like, "God, it's like, I can't breathe," and it's like, go back home and grab it.
Yeah,
It's a simple thing, but if you do have severe allergies, then it's always
yeah,
great to carry.
yeah, definitely.
And if you've got poor air quality, and mind you, we went through COVID, so we all kind of got accustomed wearing masks at some point. Can a mask is a mask going to help if it's not an N95 mask with the air quality?
It's a good question. I'm actually not sure, so I don't. I'm not. I mean, it's all dependent on the size of the particles, the different masks. So, I mean, N95 will be the most helpful, obviously, but I would think if it's like a fire and that a regular mask should help to filter at least some of that, but I'm not sure, so I don't really want to
Okay, all right.
answer that.
But it's not like you wrap
Give you
around
full
a
situation.
scarf around your head and you're gonna be able to play soccer with the scarf around your head. Okay,
No, no, I wouldn't try that. Or you could
all
try it and send us a picture if you want, Mark.
right, sure.
I like her. She's funny.
And as we go into each of these topics, it makes me realize how much an emergency doctor has to know about everything because you kind of have to treat you have to be able to treat just about anything that walks in. And there's weather and mental health, and just for you to know, at some point I'll have a psychologist come in to talk about seasonal affective disorder as we get into the fall area. But
Yeah.
do you see mental health situations linked to weather presenting themselves in your emergency room sometimes?
Yeah, so it definitely does affect. I think it's like more seasonally than sort of, week to week or day to day or anything like that. And but in the winter, winter definitely affects people for sure. One of the busiest times of year is around the Christmas season, which has a few things going on, so it's hard to tease out, but obviously the shortest days of the year.
Mm.
But then Christmas for some people, especially if they're alone, can have a lot of triggers and stressors for them. So I don't know which of those would maybe have the most effect, but seasonal depression, seasonal affective disorder is definitely a real thing. I think it affects almost all of us to some degree, or maybe that's just me. um but no, it's you know, in terms of mental health issues, definitely the winter is more has more effect, I think. And one thing for sort of mental health or emergency room visits that we everybody in the emergency department will tell you, a full moon makes weirder stuff come in. There's no evidence for that at all. Like, they've done studies, they've looked into it, and whether the emergency department is busier during a full moon, and everything says it's not. But I feel like almost everyone that you will talk to who works in an emergency department will say that we feel like it does. So I don't know. Maybe it's just one of those things.
Are those coincidences, perhaps?
Yeah. So like I had mentioned, we will talk more about this on a mental health level when I bring in a psychologist to talk about this down the road. Um, but there is something on the slide that just made me think of something, and that's vitamin D. So vitamin D, which you can find in milk and some products, but also it's natural from the sun. And so I made a point of taking vitamin D as a supplement during the winter months and through the spring as well. And then when I went to get a blood test, my doctor says, "You got too much vitamin D going on. Are you taking a supplement?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Listen, during the spring and summer, maybe you want to just stop taking that because you've got too much that is showing up in your tests." Is that something that you see happen, or is it just me?
Well, yes, I think it's pretty unusual to have too much vitamin D, certainly naturally, without taking it. But I also don't know of too many problems with with it being hot, with it being high. Um, so it's not like certain things that you really don't want it to be too high because it can be dangerous for you. With vitamin D, yeah, because we get so much of it from the sun. Maybe you drink a lot of milk. Maybe you're a
I'm not
lot
going
of
to get into that.
too many lattes or something. I don't know. But no, it's in like most people in Canada would have definitely low vitamin D. And it can affect your mood. It can affect you can feel tired, you can feel fatigued and all those things. So they actually, I don't know in Quebec, but in Ontario, the government doesn't even pay for most people for a vitamin D test because it's just assumed it's going to be low. So if you want it, you either have to if I'm ordering it as a doc, we don't do it in the emergency department, but in the clinic, if we're doing it, we have to click on a box that says these people are at risk for whatever reason, for the government to pay for it.
Like
So
osteoporosis and stuff.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, and certain chronic diseases and that kind of thing. So and it's one of those things that sort of indicates, yeah, it's might as well take the vitamin D, and it's just going to help for most people.
And I'm just receiving a message right now saying that it wasn't D, it was B12. Sorry, so that's my error.
Okay, that makes more sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I had too much. Yeah, because then I came to realize no, I didn't have too much vitamin D. It is B12, so and that's
Okay.
another
Yeah.
story. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'm fine.
You have to eat your
Um,
leafy greens.
yes.
Or you don't
So
know, you have to eat anyway, there's B12 in leafy greens. But yes, vitamin
um,
D is good to take, and it helps for a lot of different things too. So, like, I take vitamin D every day year round, and it's one of those, you know, easy things to do that can actually be quite helpful.
kids, I don't have any, but I'm assuming that children get themselves into trouble with weather conditions. Do you see more children in the ER during specific weather events?
No, I think we see it in the summer. It's anytime kids are out playing, which is more so in the summer than the winter. Then you'll see a lot more injuries. But they tend to be little, like, again, cuts and scrapes, maybe a broken bone or an ankle
Wow.
sprain, that kind of thing. So in the summertime, we definitely see more kids, or once the weather gets nicer. And otherwise, no, I think people in general are are much better at looking after their kids in terms of things like during a hot day or a heat wave. Typically, they will look after their kids much better than they do for themselves, and in fact might be so busy looking after their kids out playing or at the family barbecue or at the pool or whatever that they forget to drink. The mother maybe is forgetting to drink herself, and she's making sure the kids have their sunscreen on and all those other things. Um, so yeah, that's an issue. And then, with the storms and the winds, that is, you know, it can't. Definitely can see some really bad injuries. Again, falling trees or falling debris, but it's pretty rare. But it definitely can happen.
Can I ask you about dry drowning? The reason I bring this up is because when we were growing up 1,000 years ago during the Stone Age, that's me I'm talking about. But we had swimming lessons. I mean, that was like I think we started. I had my first swimming lessons in kindergarten and grade 1 and grade 2. But now, also like the populations are much more mobile now. So you maybe have people who come from countries who maybe grew up in a desert. So every summer there are a certain amount of drownings. But I've heard that after someone has been pulled out of the water, there's still a danger of dry drowning. Could you explain that?
So I don't think that. I think that's maybe one of those things that you hear about, but it's not. So do you mean when they?
Well,
So they,
it's not all the water has come out of their lungs. They've come out of the water,
yeah,
but there's still a fair amount. So
right. So
it's even after they're out of the water and they think they're out of the woods, that they really should get checked to make sure that the lungs have really been emptied.
yeah, yeah. So definitely. So you can have someone maybe who's drowning, gets brought in, is breathing, and they're okay. They're kind of coughing up, but they've definitely aspirated some water. And so afterwards, they can actually get that water that's gone into their lungs can cause the lungs to essentially start leaking. And you get it's a type of respiratory distress that can happen afterwards from that injury. So definitely anyone who was sort of near drowning or had to be saved or anything should definitely be checked in the hospital, even if after, because sometimes they might be like, no, I'm fine, everyone, leave me alone, or a bit embarrassed or who knows what, and sort of go off and be like, no, I'm fine. But no, they should definitely be seen because that's, I think, that I don't, it's not a medical term anyway, the dry
No,
drowning. So it's,
but
but
it just
that type
means
of
that they're
thing
out of the water
afterwards.
and they think they're out of the
Yes.
woods.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause sometimes I think people talk about it too. And, or maybe that's more my corner work of sometimes people drown and then anyway, when they check, they don't have a lot of water in the lungs at that moment because their throat has kind of closed beforehand. But definitely afterwards, you can have injury to the lungs after a near drowning that can take, a few hours to really present itself. So they definitely should get checked for sure. Yeah.
And can a child overheat quicker than an adult?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the two populations at risk for almost anything, but definitely hot, cold, or anything are the extremes of age. So the older people and younger people. But yeah, kids can overheat for a number of reasons, but with their circulation and there's sort of the amount of body surface area exposed as well. So, and they're not going to be coming and asking maybe to drink, and they're not going to realize when they're starting to get sick, especially really young kids who can't say. Babies, in strollers as well. Like you want to make sure that you're never on a hot day, that you're not putting, I think people know this already, but like something linen over top that doesn't let air through, because that actually, it's like being in a closed car, like inside that heats up. So just being really careful with babies and with young kids for sure.
And so you mentioned the other extreme. So with seniors, do you see certain folks of a certain age showing up in your emergency that get impacted by the weather? And so let me rephrase that question. Do the elderly or seniors come to the emergency more than children when weather events happen?
Yes, yeah, I would say for sure, because it's any as we get older, essentially, even if we're healthy, older people, it's our system is more finely balanced. We don't have all of the leeway in our body, the hormones in our brain function, in our muscles, in our tendons, like everything has less bandwidth for, too hot, too cold, too dry, too wet, too whatever. Like it's our bodies basically have a bit less give. So yeah, so anything that might, in your 20s or 30s, you would just be able to kind of power through. Then as you get older, your body has less reserve. Your heart, your lungs, your kidneys, your brain, they all have less reserve. And then also, as you get older, people are more prone to be on certain medications that either in heat or cold can make your body more at risk for more like unintended side effects, basically. Falls are happening too. So certainly, in the winter. So one of the things, and this is sort of all ages, but we see it more in older people, is when it's one of those days after there's been a bit of a melt and then there's the thin amount of snow overnight that falls on top. I know when I'm going into work for a day shift that we're going to see a ton of fractures. And
Yeah.
it's this, so we have the classic one is called a foosh. So it's a fall on outstretched hand, FOOSH.
Whoosh.
And if it happens a lot if we have an acronym for it. And it's like a typical thing of somebody falling down on their wrist and then breaking their wrist. And that tends to be, we see it much more in especially older women, just with osteoporosis, postmenopausal. It's much more common to have more brittle bones. So we'll definitely see a lot of fractures on a day. You know that the orthopedics team will be busy on those kind of days when it's icy out. Yeah. And then again, not necessarily an age thing, but more common as we get older, the shoveling snow. So
Mm.
after a storm is 100, it's definitely a thing that people are out shoveling, and they'll have a heart attack or have angina, maybe for the first time when they're out shoveling. And it's this combination of, so the cold weather, it's exertion. So it's physical exertion and cardiac exertion, often for people who may not be exercising regularly, but now they have to go outside and shovel that snow. And they don't think, if somebody was going out and having not exercised in ages and we're going to go for a run, they would maybe stretch before or do it a short amount. But when you're going out shoveling snow, you don't think of it as a workout, which is what it is. It's a stress test of its own. And then because it's cold, then like we were talking about before, the heat, all of your arteries and everything on the skin shut down to preserve the heat, and that increases your blood pressure. So it's this perfect setup for a heart attack or angina. So it's one of those things that we see all the time in a snowstorm is, you're going to get at least a couple of people usually coming in with, chest pain or sometimes a cardiac arrest after shoveling snow. So it's really important for people just to be aware of that, like think of it like an exercise. So, and if you have heart problems and, you pay the neighbor kid to come and do it for you or whatever. And then if you are going to go do it, one of the things that can help too is to make sure that you have really good like mitts and socks and warm jacket on, because if your extremities aren't as cold, you won't have as much as that shut down. So it helps to kind of not have the arteries and everything shut down. And then to stretch before and take it easy. You don't have to do it all at once, even though you just want to get the stupid snow shovels. And so
Take
it's really
breaks.
to have that awareness. I think people are aware of it a bit, like in the world, but it's definitely a thing.
And always remember
Um,
to lift with your knees. That's something my landlord
Yes.
told
right.
me, because
Yes. Lift with your
I
knees.
get out there and I'm very gung ho, but
Yeah.
like, if you're not like bending down,
Yeah.
and I've also had to learn like my own. I actually broke my wrist a couple of years ago, so now when I shovel snow, I like using the big shovel, but I know it's much heavier, so it might
Yes.
take me a little bit longer, but it's a lot safer for me
Yeah.
than trying to lift up 10 pounds of snow at a time as opposed to 3.
Yes, exactly. We don't think of those things until all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, this is very difficult to lift. And you wouldn't go and lift a giant box that's heavy, but suddenly we're lifting
Yeah.
that small. Yeah.
Another thing is that, in comparing the children to seniors, children are always usually, unless there's a really weird situation, accompanied by adults. But I think we have a tendency to just think seniors as being adults, and so they're fine. But usually, whenever I put out a weather warning for either a winter storm or for strong winds, or that are going to have a possibility of power outages or even heat waves, always, always, always check in on the elderly, um,
Yes.
because
Yeah,
the assumption that they're fine because they're adults is not necessarily always the case. Sometimes
yeah,
something happens that they're not mobile enough to be able to handle it. So it's really important to always just keep them in mind and stay connected to them.
Mark?
absolutely.
Mark, you brought up a very good point there because whenever we have these big, huge storms, it's not only them being cold, but very sadly, a lot of times the power's out. So they bring a barbecue or a butane heater in, and that can cause a real problem because is it hypoxia? Like your oxygen starved because of all the gas in the air?
Yeah, the
When
carbon
people,
monoxide.
carbon monoxide, right?
Yeah, yeah. So you get the carbon monoxide poisoning from that exactly, or a generator that maybe you haven't used before and it's not venting properly, or like you said, barbecues, and people don't realize. But that's a huge, yeah, that's
So
a big
dangerous.
problem too.
So dangerous.
And then we get chronic diseases. So, which chronic diseases that exist are most prone to being impacted by weather changes or weather events?
So a big one would be anything cardiac or respiratory. So, the COPD, or less so asthma, but definitely those two. Heart disease for sure, and people with things like congestive heart failure, because a lot of essentially your heart and your lungs obviously are very close together, but they're so reliant, and anything with your lungs affects your heart. Those are the major things. And it's because of the disease itself, and especially for heart disease, because of some of the treatments for it, which are great treatments. But again, they can make you more prone to having certain side effects. And it's to be aware of for people, and most people are. But then again, like you were saying, for people around them and their families to kind of look at, or neighbors or whoever, to look in on them to see, like during a storm too, like are you running out of your medications? Like, you can't get to the pharmacy, or the pharmacy can't deliver. It's to even look into that kind of thing. Do you have food? Like, are you able to eat and drink okay? So all of those things with those illnesses. Certainly mental health, we've already talked about in terms of chronic illness that weather can have a huge effect on. Things like the pressure. Now, I don't know which pressures are hot, up and down or whatever, but
Yeah, but lower air pressure can really, I get migraines because it feels like I have
yes,
a car parked on my head because it
yeah.
just opens up, like it puts pressure on my sinuses.
Exactly. So any parts in our body that are kind of liquid filled or air filled, like in the teeth, sometimes people get too, and
Yeah.
up in the, yeah. So migraines, sinus pain, joint pain, again, because you've got that, like the pressure, it affects anything that essentially where there's that space for it to affect. So those are definitely real things. Um, and I would say those are probably the main ones.
Okay. Yeah, as we've been going through this conversation, it just once again makes me realize how much you've got to deal with. And this is just the weather related stuff. I mean, there's all the other crazy things that happen. So, as an ER doctor, I know, listen, thank God for cardiovascular surgeons and all this stuff, but the ER doctors are really the ones that have to handle all this stuff that comes in, and everyone wants it looked at urgently, and you've got to deal with patients and keeping them patient. Is that the reason why they call them patients? Is
I don't know.
because
I assume so.
but it's an amazing amount of work that you folks have to do. So I really appreciate it. Which brings us to the lightning round. A bunch of questions that I'm going to shoot at you, and we'll
Okay.
see how you do.
Uh-oh. Is
Uh-oh.
there a bell or
Okay.
something?
Quick,
Horn?
quick.
Uh, the bell's going to happen when you're done. All right. So some questions here. Do you have a coffee before your shift or after your shift?
Oh, well, Diet Coke before the shift. Yeah.
Okay. Do you prefer night shifts or day shifts?
Day shifts. Are you kidding me? Yeah. Day shift.
One piece of equipment you could never work without.
Now my smartphone really, because you look stuff up and you have calculators and all sorts of stuff on there. But for more and more, so I'm now again an oldie in the emergency department, but everyone training for the past many years and now is an ultrasound machine. So when you go to an emergency department, for many things now, the doctor will walk in with a little portable ultrasound
Yeah.
machine and do a little ultrasound at the bedside, more so than using a stethoscope or any of these other things. So I'm less, so anyway, again, a bit old and I don't do as many of those. I still use it, but this generation, definitely ultrasound machines are a big thing and they're super helpful. Yeah.
Okay. One thing every family should have in their emergency kit.
Yes. Well, clean water or access to like if you're having it in your house, definitely some water, jugs of water just in case. Yeah, one thing.
Best
Trying to
health
stick to the
advice.
rule.
The best health advice you ever got.
Health advice. Well, I don't know if it's health advice, but general advice and maybe it's health as well, but that I use all the time is that because I'm bad at making decisions, I leave things to the last minute and all of this. But I remember someone telling me once so you make the decision and then you make that decision the right decision. So just whatever it is, you're going to make it right. But in my life in general, that has been very helpful because otherwise you can sit and stew about it forever. So I find that a helpful bit of advice.
Okay. This one is for my mother, for my wife, and a lot of other people that have chastised me about this over all the years. Can you catch a cold from cold weather?
No. Why? Which side do you land on, Mark?
I land on that answer.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
always told, oh well,
Yeah.
you shouldn't have been outside without your hat. And I'm like, it has nothing to do with the hat.
Yeah.
But my mother, anyways.
Yes.
Well,
About it,
that's the
so
old school, old generation.
yes.
That's what they were
Yeah.
told by
Yeah.
their own parents, kind of thing. That's
Yeah.
where
Yeah. We
Our-
get more
our-
we get more colds when it's cold outside because we tend to be more inside and the viruses are
There you
around.
go.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's not the cold weather that causes it. Yeah.
Is there such a thing as a summer cold, or is it just a cold?
It's just a cold. It just feels
Okay.
weird because it's in the summer and you feel like you shouldn't have a cold, but it's all
Mm.
just a cold. And
And it feels worse in the summer if you, especially if you have a
because
fever.
it's hot
like,
out already and you're like, oh man.
Is there
Yeah.
such a thing as a man cold?
Yes. I don't know scientifically if there is, but I can tell you there is.
there is.
Do you feed a fever, starve a cold? Is that true, or is it the other way around?
Neither, I would say. You don't want to starve or feed anything necessarily. You want to hydrate everything. So again, like just make sure you're drinking especially with the fever. You're always more dehydrated than you think you are because you sweat a lot and you lose a lot of fluid with the fever. And then often, I mean, you can have a fever with the colds. You can have a cold without a fever. Anyway, so yeah, eat whatever you want. Eat some chicken noodle soup. Drink a lot of water. Rest and sleep. Here's the thing with colds, like with viral illnesses, is it's your body's like, look, I feel like crap. I just want to sleep. You need to sleep. Like you need to sleep. You need to drink a lot of water and then you sleep some more and then you sleep some more. And then you might sleep for 24 hours straight. And that's what, like, you have to that's how, and then it goes away by itself and you can't really do much else about it. Except for a man cold, I'm told it does help to complain a lot about it. Apparently that's very therapeutic.
That's how they get through it.
Sunscreen on a sunny day or a cloudy day? Either, right?
Every day. Every day sunscreen. So my mother's Australian. So I and the Australians, who are, were a bunch of very pasty British people who went down to a very hot, sunny continent. When you go to Australia, they have amazing, like they have so many different hats and clothing for sunscreen. They have the best sunscreens. It's just part of the culture is like long sleeve. Every kid at the beach has like a swimsuit, long sleeve on with a big hat. So there's a ton of skin cancers in Australia. There's a lot in Canada too, but like if we need to learn from Australia basically. But yes, so sunscreen every day, no matter what.
Okay. And final question: apart from working at Montfort Hospital in Ottawa, your favorite place that you've ever worked?
Well, this was I guess you can call it work. I was sort of volunteering, but I did do some work so I was on this ship for a while that went down to, so for 2 months, I think it was, down to the sub-Antarctic islands. So I went to
Oh,
South
cool.
Georgia and the Falkland Islands, and I was the doctor on this boat that was doing a documentary. And I did treat a couple of little things like a seal bite and some other things. So that was very cool. South Georgia is amazing in that part of the world.
Wow.
It's like,
Well, some experiences you've had. Well, Susie, Dr.
yeah,
Susie Tector, thank you for going through all of these different questions and going through all these different subjects. And
it's my pleasure.
that's just the weather related stuff. Imagine all the other things that you deal with. I did ask you this question before we recorded, but the famous show The Pit, which everyone seems to love. I had asked you the question if you felt that it reflected reality well, and your answer was you felt it did. Uh, any elaboration you want to do on that?
Yes, it does, but it's obviously the tension and drama is really revved up. But the basic stuff, I mean, what happens in one episode of The Pit is like 2 months worth of like weird kind of dramatic things going on, or more maybe. But no, the basics of it, like the medicine of it, makes sense. They're pronouncing things properly. They're using the right kind of thing. Like you can tell that medical people were definitely involved.
And do you know
Um,
that in there that everybody running around in the background, like the orderlies and the nurses and doctors, are actually real doctors, real orderlies? Yeah,
okay, I didn't know that. So
because
that's
they wanted it
yeah,
to be really.
yeah, yeah. And that it's people just trying to work, like do their best in conditions in and the other part that it gets right is the team aspect. Like a lot of parts of medicine are like it's all teamwork basically. But I feel like especially in the emergency, like the nurses, the orderlies, the people answering the phones, the people pushing the stretchers, the people running to get the blood if we need the blood quickly, the person registering in the front, like the cleaners, like it really is this whole team. So the doctors and the nurses often sort of get, the whatever, the first billing on the pit or whatever it is. Um, but no, it's that teamwork of it. And you need it all.
Mhm.
And we need to sort of support, and there's definitely a lot of Black humor and like that. You just can't get by without that. So I think it gets all of that really, really right. And then the learners, like the medical student and the first year resident versus the second year resident and all of that, it gets that tone.
And the
Have you ever
mental
had
health issues.
have you had anyone present themselves with something where you just say, "I don't know what the hell this is"?
Yeah, that happens fairly frequently, but so our thing is, and when I talk to the medical students too, it's always, so our job is basically to make sure it's not something they're going to die from. Like my number one job is to make sure it's not something they're going to die from in the next hour or die from maybe in the next day or the next week. Like that's kind of and that's what we do. So if all I'm doing is ruling out that it's something dangerous, but then I'm not really sure, maybe it's just a muscle spasm or that kind of thing, then we've done our job. And so a lot of the people who we see in the emergency department leave with a diagnosis of, so what the shorthand would be like abdominal pain, NYD, not yet diagnosed. So we've made sure, I know for sure it's not your appendix, it's not an aneurysm, it's not a diverticulitis or a gallstone or this or that, but maybe it was some cramps, maybe it was nothing else. If it gets worse, and then we tell them like, we give them really good instructions of if it gets worse to come back. But quite a few people, and people are disappointed often because you want to, of course, you want a diagnosis, but the job of the emergency department is not to diagnose everything. It's to rule out the dangerous stuff or treat, if you have obviously a cut and we suture it up and that kind of thing. But yeah, so it's I think maybe that's, maybe. And I think emergency department, tell you my little emergency department rant, but like they're been used, especially more and more, as almost like a primary care office, like a
Yeah.
family doctor's office. But I'm not trained. I was trained as a family doctor 30 years ago or whenever it was. I don't know any of this. So if you're coming in with just because, I don't know, your blood pressure is a little bit high, but it's not like an emergency, I actually don't know the best. I know all the emergency things to do for you, but in terms of like the best blood pressure medication for this or that, or for chronic things, I don't know. I'm much worse than your family doctor at any of that. So we're trained specifically for emergencies, not for other things. Um, and then the emergency department also is the like spillage or stopgap whenever the system gets overwhelmed. It's at the emergency department where we can never say no to anyone. So our doors are always open. Like you were saying, Mark, we see everything that walks in the door. So that having emergency departments, the whole nature of it is that you can deal with that, but it gets to a point, especially during and after since COVID, that things are really overwhelmed, I think, everywhere in the world, but definitely everywhere in Canada or in Ontario and Quebec, as far as I can tell. So
Well,
yeah,
we
it's
we do thank you for your service.
yeah,
Yes, for
Uh, and
sure.
it- and with that said, let's
yes,
jump into this week in weather lore. And Susie, you'll
yes,
be sticking around with us to listen to some of this stuff.
yeah,
Um, so this week's weather lore is focused on some stuff that is July based. Some of these ones are they're summary, so they're timed properly. The first one, which is one that I had to actually learn on my own here, is Saint Swithin's Day, and I didn't even know there was a Saint Swithin. But I believe I can't remember if it's Lee's or Era that has this particular one. I think it's Lee's, right?
I'll take this one, and thank you for pronouncing it because I wasn't 100% sure, and I hadn't heard it either. St. Swithin's Day. It's one of the oldest and most famous pieces of weather folklore, which is interesting because we hadn't heard it before. But first, who was St. Swithin? He was a 9th century bishop of Westchester in England, and he's remembered for his humility and kindness. And according to tradition, he asked to be buried outside his cathedral, so that rain could fall on his grave and passerbys could walk over it. But years later, after his death, when the church officials decided to move his remains inside the cathedral on July 15th, and that's where this time is pertinent, legend says that heavy rain began and continued for 40 days. And that gave rise to the famous saying, does anybody want to take it? If it's St. Swithin's Day, be fair, for 40 days 'twill rain nae mair. If it rain on St. Swithin's Day for 40 days, it will remain. Okay. For centuries, though, farmers believed that the weather on the 15th would determine the next 6 weeks of weather, and it helped it use as a guide for planting and harvesting. So that's where it came from. That's where the lore was. And for modern meteorologists tell a different story. There's no atmospheric mechanism that can lock in the weather for 40 days based on a single day. However, in parts of northwestern Europe, weather patterns in mid-July can sometimes become relatively stable for a period of time, which may explain why this old folklore persisted for so many generations.
Wow,
And
I feel so much smarter now knowing all about Saint Swithin.
I know, but I never heard of it myself either.
I've
Yeah.
heard of it on Monty Python, but nothing else.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah.
So the next one, listen to the crickets. Era.
Oh, yes, and this is actually scientifically true, and I know that because I noticed that the crickets for the first time started up last night. So it's Listen to the Crickets. It's called Dolbear's Law, and Amos Dolbear was an American physicist and inventor in the late 1800s, and when he was studying nature, he noticed that the crickets seemed to chirp faster on warm evenings and more slowly when it was cool. And in 1897, being a real smart guy, he published a simple mathematical relationship that became known as Dolbear's Law. So, how it works is that crickets are cold blooded or ectothermic. I've never heard that before, meaning their body temperature and the speed of their metabolism is controlled by the temperatures around them. So if the air warms, their muscles contract more quickly, allowing them to chirp faster. They're looking for girlfriends, by the way. That's why they cricket. When temperatures drop, their metabolism slows, and so does their chirping. For snowy tree crickets, you can estimate the temperature by counting the chirps for 15 seconds and then adding 37. So if you're really not busy tonight, the result gives a surprisingly accurate estimate of the air temperature in degrees Fahrenheit. So unlike many weather sayings, this one is really rooted in science as long as you're listening to the right kind of crickets.
It goes to show the things that you'll do to have a law named after you, right? Who would think of taking time to think to count that and then think of the 37? And anyway, all the credit to Mr. Dolbear and his law. And now we know that the next time we hear crickets, we'll think of Mr. Dolbear.
Yes.
Swallows flying low. Lee.
I don't know. I haven't heard that one either. But it is an old saying, and when swallows fly low, rain is on the way. And unlike many weather myths, this one actually has solid scientific explanations. So swallows are aerial insect hunters. They spend much of their day catching flies, mosquitoes, and other insects while in flight. And as a storm approaches, the atmosphere begins to change, humidity rises, air pressure often falls, and the air becomes more stable and dense near the ground. So these changes affect the tiny flying insects, making them harder for them to stay high in the air and descend closer to the ground, and the swallows simply follow their food. If the insects are flying low, so are the birds. So the birds aren't predicting the weather as a magical, mystical sense. They're reacting to the same atmospheric changes that eventually lead to rain. And it's a wonderful example on how careful observation of nature can give rise.
It's cool. I didn't know that, but it makes sense, really.
It makes sense, yeah.
I
Now,
love it.
This one, and I'm sure Mark, you and Lise have heard this a lot. Basically, as July, so next January, people think it's like some sort of punishment, right? Well, we had a really great summer. We're going to have a terrible January. So basically, this lore says that if you have a hot, dry July, that means it'll be followed by a really cold, dry January, while a cold, wet July would foreshadow a milder and wetter winter. Well, this goes back to medieval Europe when they didn't have barometers or seasonal forecasts and depended on natures for clues. So January and July are almost exactly 6 months apart. So people believe that the seasons would mirror one another around the midpoint of the year. And if they thought they saw similar weather patterns repeating over time, the saying was passed down from one generation to the next. Now, we can tell you that the atmosphere does not work that way. I wish it did sometimes, but it really doesn't. Weather is driven by constantly changing patterns in the jet stream, ocean temperatures, and large-scale climate oscillations like El Nino, and we got a super El Nino this year, and La Nina. So conditions in July simply don't determine what will happen in January 6 months later. So while there's no scientific evidence to support this old saying, it reminds us of how our ancestors carefully observed the weather and searched for any clue that might help them prepare for the seasons ahead. And in my grandmother's case, it was if my bunions are blown up, then there's rain coming.
So if we were to take this one and July has been hot and humid, what would that mean for January?
Now, the thing is to say as in July, so it's January. So in weather lore, it means if it's really hot in July, it's going to be really cold in January. But we all know we live in Montreal.
So I know. No, I was just taking that example because it's been hot and I don't like it.
Yeah.
So
it's like when people, like Groundhog Day, people say he saw a shadow, 6 more weeks of winter, and all of us living in Montreal go, if we were only so lucky.
Yeah.
Because this year winter kind of went right into May. So
yeah.
So there's the weather lore for the week, which brings us to this week in weather history. So last week we were talking about the big flood in Montreal in 1987 that flooded the Carrie. We had another Quebec event that happened this coming week, which
Oh,
was
yeah.
the Saguenay floods.
Well,
And that was July 19th and 20th in 1996. And when I saw the year, it felt that it was more recent than that. But yeah, it was 96. And one of the most devastating natural disasters in Quebec's history, where we had about 250 to 280 millimeters of rain in less than 48 hours. And that image of that house
yeah,
surviving everything around it that disappeared, and that house still stands till this day.
does it?
Um, Quite an impressive event.
Yeah. That house, if you just put that house, those who remember the event will know that that's from the Saguenay floods.
Yeah, and that was $1.5 billion in damages in those days. Absolutely
Wow.
crazy. In 2011, we had the North American heat wave, and so I said to myself, 2011, it's not that long ago. I was thinking back to it. I can't necessarily remember specifically this particular heat wave, but then again, it was a long lasting one because it was July and it went into August as well. Um, Peak heat July 21st to 22nd, where we had a heat index humidex of 131 degrees Fahrenheit, 55 Celsius. Most of the pocket of heat was in that just west of the Midwest of the United States, but it did reach all the way up into Quebec as well and Ontario. Um, and yeah, so that was a decent heat wave, kind of like the weather that we had yesterday. Well, that we could have had yesterday if the smoke hadn't kept the sun from hitting the ground. But imagine having those temperatures for an
No,
extended period of time.
don't want to imagine that. No, I do
I
not
remember
want to imagine that.
I
That
remember
is
that.
so
Go
hot.
ahead, Liz. Sorry. No, you
No,
go.
no, but I'm just saying it's just because it was so hot, and
Yeah.
I don't handle the heat very well either. So that would have been terrible. I must have not had a good summer that summer.
Yeah.
Well, I was just
So
going to say, I remember that one very quickly because that was when you have extreme heat like that, you have a lot more tornadic activity. And that year, they had the biggest tornado outbreak in 75 years in Dixie Valley and Tornado Alley, accumulating in 3 days of 4 F5s that traveled across Kentucky, Alabama, Arkansas. But it was because of that heat and humidity. There, I've got my weather geek moment there.
So, folks, we've asked a lot of questions today, so I'm going to leave it at that. But if anyone that's listening has got questions that they want to ask us on any other topics coming down the road, and we will be talking about it. So, just to give some folks kind of a indication of some of the topics that we'll go through in the coming weeks. We will have a segment that's going to be entirely on northeastern weather and why it's so unique. But we will also want to bring in a pilot to talk about the weather and the impact in flying aviation. And a lot of questions that would come around that in terms of, how does a plane survive going through crazy storms? So we can ask those questions. Like I mentioned earlier in the show, we'll have a psychologist come in and talk about seasonal effect on mental health, and that'll be more towards the fall months. And any other topics that you want us to cover, feel free to share that with us. You can get us on our, as I click this, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube channel. YouTube's probably the best way to do it, folks. If you want to comment on this video, ask a question, and I'll tabulate it and put it into the one of the next shows. And that's about it. So, folks, I really thank you for joining us. Susie, once again, I know you're on vacation,
Yeah, thank
taking
you,
the
Doc.
time out from your busy schedule of vacation and doing your work reports at the same time. So thanks for that time. It was good seeing you as well. And
Thank you.
so we'll see everyone next week on the show. Stay tuned, be safe, and keep your eyes on the skies. Take care.